Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Look us up in the sports section on Roku. We have over 5,000 subscribers there. We're there, Dwyer Boxing and Sports News. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. In my opinion, the only people who should be betting on this Chavez Jr. versus Vera fight should be speculators. You know who you are. You're prepared to lose it all. You're looking for much better than even money odds, right? You can look at yourself and you can watch a fight knowing that there's a very good chance that you expect to lose, right? Knowing that you're swimming against the tide. Now, I'll just say this, and I don't say it lightly. Boxing has a lot to do with physical fitness. You really have to be at your best, right? If you back away from the game and head to the buffet table, if you stay out of the gym, right? If you're loading up on things like donuts and beer, if you're out living the life, and if you're doing that for a prolonged period of time, right? Let's say not just 1 or 2 months, but 1 or 2 years, right? Then my point to you is simply, you're going to have a very hard time, even if you're 28 years old, like Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. is, getting back in championship shape. Because it's not just you against a stopwatch. It's you against an opponent who might be hungry, who might be in the gym, who might be reading the nutritional information on the foods he's eating, who might be looking at tapes of himself and opponents and great fighters to try to improve his game. Now, I saw the first fight and I thought Vera dominated that first fight. The more I look at it, the more I'm convinced he dominated the first fight between these two. I know he's a better than 3-1 underdog here, according to the casinos. I understand this is a must-win fight for Chavez Jr. That other big cash cow names like Carl Froch are actually lining up to fight Chavez Jr. I understand Chavez Jr. is well connected, right? His promoter is Bob Arum, right? And, of course, his father is a boxing legend, right? Chavez Jr. has had many fights that have been sellouts. He's been on premium cable stations multiple times, right? The politics of this fight would suggest that beating Chavez Jr. is going to be awfully hard for a guy who officially lost the first fight, especially when this fight is in San Antonio. Now again, I said only speculators should dive in this part of the pool. It's choppy here. People are going to laugh at you, right? But I have to say, I like Vera in the rematch. I don't think Chavez Jr. can get himself in elite shape anymore. The body can only bounce back so much, right? What's interesting is when you see a guy who suddenly starts losing volume, who can't put punches together, right? Who, even in big fights, the Martinez fight, can't put together punches for 11 rounds. 11. And when you're finding out that that fighter didn't have a broken arm the night of the fight, right? Didn't have a torn pec muscle that's fight specific, where you say, all right, he had a bad night because of this injury. When you find out that the guy didn't train properly for the fight, big fight, huge stage, doesn't train properly, has his trainer Freddie Roach leave him. Right? When you're finding out that this guy during training camp is getting busted for alleged DUIs and stuff like that. And when you also find out that this guy was big for his weight at 160 and now is fighting closer to his weight. So that I'm the bigger man in the ring advantage is no longer that big an advantage. When you factor in all of these things, I really believe that just like a marathon runner can't decide to just gain weight, hit the club, eat whatever they want, do what they want, sign a contract to run a marathon, and then expect to compete against other marathon runners who've been keeping themselves on top of their game, I don't think Chavez Jr., even if he tries, even if he decides this training camp, I'm going to do it upright. I'm not even going to be in the area code of getting busted for a DUI because I'm not going to be drinking at all during training camp. Right? I'm not going to be driving around by myself late at night during training camp. Right? I'm going to hit the gym. I'm going to try my best. You know the hard thing with old age? It's that day you wake up and you realize that your best physically isn't what it once was. I believe right now that's where Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. is. Let's talk numbers. He's fighting Brian Vera. At a minimum, you had to think that fight was close going into the later rounds. That's at a minimum. Right? That's best case for Chavez Jr. Right? If you're in Chavez Jr.'s corner going into, let's say, the 7th round, you had to think, wow, this fight is closer than we thought it was going to be. Our guy right here has to step up. Right? You know, it's a 10-round fight. You have to figure the championship rounds in a 10-round fight would be what? The last third of the fight? Rounds 8, 9, and 10? If you're the heavy favorite with so much to lose, right? You would figure you've got to hit the gas. Now let me just say, if you're in shape, you keep yourself in shape, your weight doesn't vary a lot, you're not the man at the pub like Ricky Hatton was, you're not having the problems Roberto Duran had back in the day, you're actually always close to fighting shape, you know where the accelerator is. Now let's go look at the CompuBox numbers with the fight hanging in the balance against Brian Vera. And let me point out, this is one fight after Chavez Jr. embarrassed himself for 11 rounds against Sergio Martinez. You would think pride kicks in at some point, and some fighter would say, man, I didn't give myself a chance to win that fight. This next fight, I'm going to be ready. So let's get to round 7. Brian Vera, Chavez. How many punches? How many power punches? Right? How many power punches do you think Chavez Jr. threw in round 7 against Brian Vera? Right? After a tough start to the fight. Let me tell you how many. 20. By contrast, Brian Vera in the 7th round threw 35 power punches. Chavez Jr., 20. Now keep in mind, no one gets knocked down in the fight. We get to the 8th round. Certainly, there has to be urgency right now. Fight hangs in the balance. The crowd is buzzing. You got an opponent who, at this point, is sensing the upset. How many power punches does Chavez Jr. throw in the 8th round? Would it surprise you to know that he threw 18 power punches in the 8th round? 18. By contrast, Brian Vera, who we're supposed to believe lost this fight, threw 37 power punches in the 8th round. We get to the 9th round. Okay, now, let's say you're in Chavez Jr.'s corner. You see your guy go out and throw 20 power punches in round 7, 18 in round 8. It's a 10-round fight. It's close. Right? Again, when I say it's close, I'm talking about best case for Chavez Jr. I believe there are many in the crowd at that point who thought this fight's over in favor of Vera. Okay, so we get to the 9th round. How many power punches do you think Chavez Jr. threw in the 9th round? 15. By the way, the quote-unquote loser of the fight, Brian Vera, threw 49 power punches in the 9th round. Chavez Jr., with everything hanging on the line, looking at the possibility of losing 2 fights in a row. Round 9, throws 15 power punches. We get to the 10th round. Here it is, final round of the fight. Right? If you look at the footage, you see that the crowd at this point is a Brian Vera crowd. Right? Even the crowd has figured out that Chavez Jr. is unprepared. That Chavez Jr. is not throwing punches. In the 10th round, Chavez Jr. ups his game. He throws a whopping 24 power punches. Right? Brian Vera threw 41. Now, the point I'm making is, when you abuse the sport of boxing will abuse you back. Right? You cannot take off training camp after training camp and then think you can turn it back on demand. Right? Keep in mind, too, that Chavez Jr. is in unfamiliar territory because he's no longer fighting at middleweight. Right? So here's a guy who had such bad training camp habits that Freddie Roach gives up on him. Right? Let's just call it what it is. Freddie Roach wasn't even in his corner for the Vera fight. By the way, Freddie Roach is not back in his corner. Freddie Roach has moved on. For those of you who might think that Freddie Roach is reducing his workload in preparation for retirement, understand Freddie Roach is taking on guys like Miguel Cotto. Freddie Roach is still in Manny Pacquiao's corner. Right? Freddie Roach is in Ruslan Provodnikov's corner. Freddie Roach isn't scaling back his work. He's just dropping guys who he feels aren't worth his time. So I view Chavez Jr. as a car crash about to happen. Now, by contrast, look at Brian Vera. I just told you his numbers for late in the fight. The guy's still bringing it. You know, he took on Sergei in Zurich, beat him. He took on Sergio Mora, one of my favorite fighters. If you're in a defense, Sergio Mora is entertaining. He beat him. Right? Brian Vera is a guy who upsets opponents. Now, there is film. I have seen Brian Vera get dominated. Right? Physically, manhandled by James Kirkland. But understand, James Kirkland is the opposite of Chavez Jr. Right? While Chavez Jr. is apparently loosely training for fights, James Kirkland is out there running up hills, pushing tires. He's a workout machine. I get the feeling that somebody looked at the James Kirkland film and thought they could overwhelm Brian Vera with Chavez Jr. Right? There has to be some advisor someplace who saw Kirkland physically impose himself on Brian Vera, and who then reached the conclusion that the bigger Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. could physically impose himself on Brian Vera. Wrong. They're two different guys. Right? Kirkland's always in shape. Chavez Jr., not so much. So here, it's high risk. I'm not even sure if the fight's 12 rounds. If it's 10 rounds, just like the first fight, the odds of some chicanery increase dramatically. If it's 10 rounds, then even an out-of-shape guy can say, you know what, I'm going to target 6 rounds. 6 of the 10. Right, to try to win this fight. But I have to be blunt with you folks. I don't even think Chavez Jr. can do that. You know, there comes a time where the people around a fighter go up to him and say, hey, give us the keys to the car. It's over. Right? At 28, and I know it's crazy, but at 28, with this low volume, with guys fleeing his training camp, right? Freddie Roach fleeing his training camp, even though Chavez Jr. is a big draw. Right? With all of that happening, if you go back, by the way, and you look at Chavez Jr. against Sebastian Zvick, take a look at those CompuBox numbers. Chavez Jr. wins the fight. But take a look at that CompuBox numbers. Right? Just take a look at it. Understand, too, there are a couple of fights in there that are fascinating. Emanuel Stewart rarely ever complained that an opponent did not follow the rules. Right? Stewart's old school. Rarely ever would he make such a complaint. But, of course, there's some issue about the drug testing protocol following Chavez's fight against Andy Lee. And if you look at a tape of that fight, you'll see Andy Lee comes out and he's on top. Then Chavez Jr. starts overwhelming him. Well, let's just say Brian Vera's already seen 10 rounds of Chavez Jr. He hasn't been overwhelmed. Marco Antonio Rubio, pretty good opponent. Just Google the Rubio camp's concerns about the drug testing protocol at the end of that fight. Right? Is it possible that Chavez Jr.'s game has been fading for longer than we want to imagine? Right? I'm not here saying that I know with certainty what happened in the fights I've referenced. But let's just say that it's interesting that as those fights happened, there were not just concerns, but there were concerns that fighters like Rubio and trainers like Emanuel Stewart voiced to the public. Then, of course, Chavez Jr. gains weight after losing badly to Sergio Martinez. Right? Ignore the 12th round for a second. Look at the other 11. Understand the only reason Martinez is in front of him in the 12th round is because Martinez was putting on a show. Martinez easily could have just said, I've won this fight by several rounds. I'm just going to dance and wave at him in the 12th round. Could easily have done that. Look at the Brian Vera fight. Right? Those of you who want to say, hey, he won the fight. All I'm saying is he did so with low volume. You want to know how low the volume was for him? 10-round fight. Forget power punches. Why don't we look at total punches? Brian Vera threw 734 total punches in the 10 rounds. Right? You've heard what Vera threw. More than 700 punches. In a fight in which the judges ruled in Chavez Jr.'s favor. Just guess how many punches Chavez Jr. threw over 10 rounds. According to CompuBox, 328. Right? I believe this fight picks up where the other fight left off. I don't care what Chavez Jr. tries to do in his training camp. I really feel that, unfortunately, once you walk away from the sport, even while you're having fights, but once you've mentally checked out and you can't even prepare for a unification fight against Sergio Martinez, once you've reached that point, right, where you've checked out of the sport, you cannot come back and assume you're going to get yourself in remotely the same physical condition. This is only for the hardcore, big-time gambler who thinks he can beat the politics in boxing. This is a high-risk fight, the highest risk possible. I believe he's better than 3-1 underdog, Ryan Vera, to win the rematch. Consider me a Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. skeptic. There's a reason why the big names are lining up to fight him. I believe it's because they understand that the public perception is way ahead of this fighter's actual talents at this stage of his career. I like Vera to win the rematch. Big upset. We'll find out if it happens. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. Thanks for stopping by.